Forget Tomcat, Sylvester the Cat, even Hello Kitty. The most famous and most iconic fictional cat in pop culture history is Garfield, the title character of the most widely syndicated comic strip in the world as recognized by the Guinness Book of Records. Since his debut on June 19, 1978, we've come to know and love Garfield as that overweight orange tabby, famous for his laziness and sarcasm, who loves lasagna and hates Mondays. The character is responsible for over $1 billion in merchandise sales. A little too much to cover in one video, so today we are reliving Garfield's history in animation, from the original television specials in the 80s to Garfield and Friends becoming a staple of Saturday morning cartoons in the 90s before his big screen debut in the early 2000s. Thanks for tuning in to Toon Raider. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you learned something today, and hit the like button to pay tribute to the big fat hairy deal that is the animated Garfield. Garfield's animated debut came in 1980 when he was featured in The Fantastic Funnies, a television special showcasing popular comic strips at the time, and which was broadcast on CBS on May 15, 1980. The Fantastic Funnies was produced by Bill Melendez and Lee Mendelsohn, the partnership behind the production of the Peanuts specials, and the Fantastic Funnies featured live-action segments with American actress Lonnie Anderson hosting, as well as interviews with other comic strip creators like Charles Schulz, Dick Brown, and Johnny Hart, who showcased their comic strips like Peanuts, Hagar the Horrible, and BC, among others. Having made its national debut only 2 years prior, Garfield is introduced as a newcomer, and Garfield himself was voiced in the special by Scott Beach. The Garfield segments were adaptations of comic strips from the previous 2 years, and aside from being the earliest official animated feature of Garfield, the special would also be the only animated crossover between Garfield and Snoopy. After Garfield at Large topped the New York Times bestseller list in 1980, interest grew in adapting the character for television. And after being approached by CBS about an animated adaptation of Garfield, in 1981, Garfield's creator Jim Davis started writing a TV special as his first venture into animated television beyond the comic strip. Davis initially had trouble working out how to animate the special's opening dance sequence, and was reportedly advised by Peanuts creator Charles M. Schulz, who was in the same California studio that day, and redrew Davis's work, giving Garfield larger feet instead of his regular tiny cat feet, the result being easier to animate. The special was titled Here Comes Garfield, the first of 12 Garfield television specials made for CBS between 1982 and 1991. Bill Melendez and Lee Mendelsohn of the Peanuts specials also produced Here Comes Garfield, a consequence of the two comics sharing the same syndicate, United Media. Animator Phil Roman had directed several Peanuts specials and was brought in to direct Here Comes Garfield. Sandy Kenyon provided the voice of John Arbuckle, while the responsibility of voicing Garfield was given to veteran actor Lorenzo Music, who was given the role after one audition. Jim Davis reportedly noticed Music in a room full of voice actors before the audition, sitting in the corner quietly licking himself. Lorenzo Music would go on to voice Garfield until his death in 2001. Here Comes Garfield centers around Garfield attempting to rescue his friend, Odie the dog, from the city pound, after Odie is snatched off the street, assumed to be a stray. At first, Garfield is happy with the change, but soon reminisces over his and Odie's friendship since early childhood, and after realizing he misses his friend, decides to break Odie out of dog jail. Like later Garfield specials, Here Comes Garfield is oftentimes sentimental and provided Davis an opportunity to develop the characters of Garfield and company beyond the confines of the comic strip. The special featured a soundtrack of songs composed by Ed Bogas and voice actress Desiree Goyette, who was married to producer Lee Mendelsohn at the time, but Goyette would later marry Ed Bogas, and the two would enjoy many years of collaborating together, producing soundtracks and musical numbers for the Garfield animated franchise. Desiree Goyette performed the songs alongside singer Lou Rawls, who took inspiration from Bill Cosby's Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. And in addition to writing and performing the musical numbers, Goyette was also the performance model for Garfield's dance during the title song. Here Comes Garfield was first broadcast on CBS on October 25, 1982, and was a huge ratings success, viewed by an audience of 50 million people. And at the 35th Primetime Emmy Awards in 1983, Here Comes Garfield was nominated for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program, losing out to Ziggy's Gift, while Full Roman was nominated for the Outstanding Individual Achievement in Animated Programming. The ratings and critical success of Here Comes Garfield encouraged CBS to commission additional Garfield specials, the second coming almost exactly 1 year later, with Garfield on the Town being broadcast on the CBS network on October 28, 1983. Garfield on the Town was co-written by Jim Davis and Garfield voice actor Lorenzo Music, with Phil Roman returning to direct and Bill Melendez and Lee Mendelsohn once again producing. Having initially voiced John Arbuckle in The Fantastic Funnies, Tom Huge returned to voice Garfield's owner and would voice John Arbuckle until his retirement in 2001. Huge was a fraternity brother of Jim Davis and would officially join Davis's company, Paws Incorporated, in 1984 as a writer, producer, and creative director, while Huge also contributed to the creation of Jim Davis's other comic strip, U.S. Acres. On his way to the vet, Garfield falls out of John's car and ends up lost, where he encounters a large gang of hostile alley cats known as the Claws. Garfield ends up in an abandoned Italian restaurant, where, in an incredibly touching moment, Garfield meets his mother, who tells him that the building was actually Garfield's birthplace, and where he inherited his love for lasagna, and where Garfield meets the rest of his extended family. Garfield eventually leaves and is picked up by John, who takes him home and puts him to bed. Although the viewership was slightly less compared to the first special, Garfield on the Town won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program at the 36th Primetime Emmy Awards in 1984, ahead of its Flash Beagle, Charlie Brown. The soundtrack for Garfield on the Town was once again performed by Desiree Goyette and Lou Rawls, and Jim Davis identified the special as a personal favorite, highlighting the moment where Garfield meets his mother. And in 1984, Garfield on the Town was loosely adapted as a Christmas storyline in the comic strip. 1 year later saw the release of the third Garfield special, Garfield in the Rough, released on CBS on October 26, 1984. Unlike the previous two specials, Garfield in the Rough was not produced by Melendez and Mendelsohn, but was produced instead by Phil Roman, who by this time had founded his own production company called Film Roman to produce the specials himself, and would continue to direct. Garfield in the Rough follows the misadventures of Garfield, John, and Odie on a camping trip. And in 1985, the special won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program for the second year in a row. Another Primetime Emmy Award would follow for the subsequent Garfield special, Garfield's Halloween Adventure, originally titled Garfield in Disguise, which first aired on October 30th, 1985. Unlike the emotional sentimentality of the first two Garfield specials, the Halloween Adventure starts off lightheartedly before taking an abrupt left turn into abject horror, complete with jump scare. And over the years, the special has become considered an animated Halloween classic, alongside It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. Garfield's Halloween Adventure won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program for the third year in a row, with the only other nominee being another Garfield special, Garfield in Paradise. Another 3 Garfield specials would be released in each subsequent year: Garfield in Paradise, Garfield Goes Hollywood, and A Garfield Christmas, and all three specials were nominated for an Emmy Award. Following the success of the television specials, a Saturday morning cartoon was developed called Garfield and Friends, produced by Phil Roman in collaboration with United Media Productions. Garfield and Friends maintained the same visual style of the earlier specials with traditional 2D cell animation and followed voice cast continuity with Lorenzo Music reprising his role in voicing Garfield, Tom Huge as John Arbuckle, and Greg Berger returning to voice Odie as he had done in the previous specials. The series also incorporated characters from U.S. Acres, a comic strip also created by Davis which began in 1986, a strip which centered on a group of barnyard animals, with the main character being a small pig named Orson. Garfield and Friends was designed for Saturday morning viewing, with each 30-minute episode featuring 2 Garfield story segments, 1 U.S. Acres segment in the middle, and short quickies, which were 30 to 45-second gags, often at the start or end of each episode. Mark Evanier served as head writer for the show and either wrote or co-wrote almost every episode. Evanier was already a veteran TV writer by this point, with years of experience in writing for Saturday morning cartoons, and his involvement in Garfield and Friends brought with it a sharp, witty, self-referential humor that was often edgier and more surreal than typical children's cartoons of the era, while staying true to the comic strip's tone. Married couple Ed Bogas and Desiree Goyette returned to compose the music for the series, while Goyette also provided voices for many of the show's characters, including Nermal, a kitten who appeared in the comic strip and who often visits Garfield to antagonize him. The series had 3 different theme songs, beginning with Friends Are There, which featured Garfield and the U.S. Acres crew fighting for screen time in a song about friendship. At the end of each version of the theme, Garfield says something different.
You folks have this confused. I'm real and you're animated.
Garfield and Friends debuted on CBS on September 17, 1988, as part of its Saturday morning children's lineup, alongside Superman and the Adventures of Raggedy Ann and Andy. Shortly after came another Garfield special, Garfield His 9 Lives, released on November 22, 1988, just over 2 months after the debut of Garfield and Friends. Garfield His 9 Lives was adapted from a 1984 anthology book of the same name that showcases the 9 lives of Garfield. The book is divided into 10 segments, detailing the creation of cats and the different lives of Garfield. And the television special followed the format of the book in telling stories in different art styles. 6 stories from the book were adapted into the animated special, while 4 new segments and a new ending were created. Garfield His 9 Lives was nominated for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program, but lost to Garfield's Babes and Bullets, another special released the following year. Babes and Bullets was another story from the Garfield His 9 Lives anthology book, but was developed into a standalone special in 1989, and featured Garfield reimagined as a private detective named Sam Spade, attempting to solve a murder mystery in a classic film noir spoof. Garfield's Babes and Bullets won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program, 1 hour or less, the 4th and final Emmy Award for the Garfield franchise. Garfield's Thanksgiving was released in November that same year, followed by another 2 specials, Garfield's Feline Fantasies, which took place between the 2nd and 3rd seasons of Garfield and Friends in 1990, and Garfield Gets a Life in 1991, all 3 earning Emmy Award nominations. Garfield Gets a Life was the final in the series of 12 Garfield television specials, as the success of Garfield and Friends caused CBS to cancel new animated specials in 1990. It was also the only Garfield special directed by John Sperry instead of Phil Roman, who served as producer, as well as being the final Garfield production to feature music by Desiree Goyette. Garfield and Friends ran for a total of 121 episodes from September 1988 until it was eventually cancelled in December 1994 as a result of the Saturday morning cartoon format going into decline by the mid-1990s, despite the show being a success in the ratings at the time. With all the networks scaling back on their Saturday morning cartoon schedules, CBS, after the last episode of Garfield and Friends had been completed, proposed a reduction to the show's budget. Since the show had been doing well enough in syndication, the production company found it unnecessary to produce more episodes. In the intro of the final episode, Garfield states,
After 7 seasons, we've pretty much said everything you can say in this spot.
We would have to wait 10 years until Garfield next appeared in animated form, when he made his big screen debut in the live-action computer-animated film titled Garfield the Movie, released in theaters on June 11, 2004, which was followed by a sequel titled Garfield: A Tale of Two Kitties, released on June 16, 2006. Both films were released by 20th Century Fox, and both films featured Bill Murray voicing Garfield, Breckin Meyer as John Arbuckle, and Jennifer Love Hewitt as Dr. Liz Wilson. Despite receiving negative reviews from critics, the films were both commercial successes. 3 direct-to-video films were released by Paws Incorporated in cooperation with Davis Entertainment, the first being Garfield Gets Real, released on November 20, 2007. Garfield Gets Real was written by Garfield creator Jim Davis, who had started working on the script in the autumn of 1996. Greg Berger reprises his role of Odie, but Garfield is voiced by legendary voice actor Frank Welker, while John is voiced by Willie Wingate. The film received mostly unfavorable reviews, but did spawn a video game, Garfield Gets Real, released in the United States on July 21, 2009, and became the first entry in a trilogy of computer-animated Garfield films, the next being Garfield's Fun Fest, released on August 5, 2008, followed by Garfield's Pet Force on June 16, 2009. All 3 films were written by Jim Davis and featured Frank Welker voicing Garfield and Greg Berger voicing Odie. In November 2009, Garfield was rebooted in a brand new animated series entitled The Garfield Show, a CGI cartoon series produced by French animation production company Dargaud Media in collaboration with Paws Incorporated. Garfield and Friends head writer Mark Evanier returned to write several episodes of The Garfield Show, and Frank Welker, Greg Berger, and Wally Wingate reprised their roles from the recent Garfield trilogy of films to voice Garfield, Odie, and John Arbuckle, respectively. The Garfield Show references Garfield and Friends at times, but is set in a different universe to the previous animated series. Liz is elevated to main character status and is in an official relationship with John, reflecting their status in the comic strip at the time. And a major change is that Garfield is now a talking character, with John and other humans at times actually able to understand him. The Garfield Show retained many recurring characters from the comic strip, including Arlene, Garfield's main love interest, the kitten Nermal, and Squeak, a resident mouse and good friend of Garfield's, only this time Squeak has brought his many relatives along to live with them. New characters were also introduced to the show, such as Vito, a local Italian chef and restaurant owner, and Harry, a stray cat who acts as both a friend and a nemesis to Garfield. The Garfield Show premiered in France on the France 3 channel on 22nd of December 2008. And while it received mixed reviews, it was successful enough to run for 5 seasons until 2016, producing 107 episodes in total. Garfield returned in 2019 in Garfield Originals, a series of 2D animated shorts created by Jim Davis and Philippe Vidal, who also directed the series. And Garfield Originals was once again produced by French production company Dargaud Media, this time in collaboration with French animation studio Ellipse Anime. Garfield Originals was a series of 24 episodes in total, each 3-minute episode comprising 5 shorts of 30 seconds, totaling 120 shorts altogether. The series was a departure from previous Garfield animated series in that it featured almost no dialogue, relying instead on physical comedy inspired by silent films and other silent cartoons, like the Pink Panther. Garfield Originals premiered in France on December 6, 2019 on the France 3 channel and Oku, with half of the show's episodes airing on December 6, 2019, the remaining half on June 17, 2020. The series has been added to Nick.com in the United States, as well as being uploaded to YouTube by the official channel of The Garfield Show. And finally, after a lengthy delay, the third theatrical Garfield film was released on May 1st, 2024, a new CG animated film simply titled The Garfield Movie, directed by Mark Dindell, and which featured Chris Pratt as the voice of Garfield and Nicholas Hoult as John Arbuckle. The Garfield movie also stars Samuel L. Jackson, who voiced Vic, Garfield's estranged biological father, and even the voice talents of Snoop Dogg, who ironically voiced a cat, Maurice, a blue Maine Coon with an eye patch and who was one of Vic's former crew members. Snoop Dogg also collaborated with Keith Urban on an original song for the film titled Let It Roll, which was released as a single on April 12th, shortly before the release of the film. In keeping with previous Garfield films, the Garfield movie received generally negative reviews from critics, but was a box office success, and was nominated at the 2024 Kids' Choice Awards for Favorite Animated Movie. A sequel is in development, with Chris Pratt set to reprise his voice role as Garfield, and Mark Dindell returning as director. It didn't take long for Garfield's popularity to grow beyond the comic strip, as he, John, and Odie became mainstays in the world of animation throughout the 80s and 90s, while maintaining a continuity in voice cast and art styles over the 12-year period from the release of Here Comes Garfield to the final episode of Garfield and Friends. Garfield's 12 original television specials were each nominated for an Emmy Award, winning 4 in total, while Garfield and Friends would have a massive influence on animated kids shows going forward and help set the tone of Saturday morning cartoons in the 1990s. Let us know in the comments which of the Garfield specials were your particular favorites. I enjoyed all of them, but Garfield His 9 Lives is a particularly interesting one. Aside from the different art styles of each story, it also develops the character of Garfield beyond his current incarnation, and even retells the story of his early childhood, living with his mother in the place where little Garfield was born, the Italian restaurant, as seen before in Garfield on the Town. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Please like this video if you learned something today, and be sure to share this video with friends and family who have enjoyed the Garfield cartoons and movies over the years. I'll be back again soon, so be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more cartoon history.